On the winter night of glittering chandeliers and brittle laughter, the most powerful duke in the city slips from a royal banquet and into a dim cafe where a rebellious voice slices through the smoke. Her words wound. His pride breaks. To understand her world, he will vanish behind a healer's coat, trading velvet for vows in the poorest streets. A secret identity is forged. A single touch threatens to betray it. Between duty and desire, compassion and deception, one reckless choice will demand the truth or destroy it. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what you crave most in period romances. Forbidden love, redemption, or class-defying courage? Paris, in the year of our Lord 1821, was a city wrapped in velvet and smoke. Its facades glistened beneath the sheen of gaslight, its salons pulsed with laughter and deceit, and yet, beneath the marble columns and perfumed words, there beat the aching heart of a people forgotten. That evening, the salons of the Palais de Luxembourg were ablaze with opulence. Laughter clinked in crystal goblets. A quartet played in a corner. The nobility, draped in silks, medals, and powdered smiles, drifted like ghosts across floors polished to reflection. Among them stood Adrien de Valcourt, duke of that ancient and iron-clad name, tall as a soldier and still as a statue. He wore a coat of midnight blue, tailored to perfection, a cravat folded like a snowdrift at his throat. A medallion gleamed at his chest, awarded not for valor but for loyalty to what he no longer knew. His hair, dark as chestnut bark, had been brushed and styled with surgical care, and yet nothing about him that night belonged to the festivities. He had smiled, yes. He had danced once with the daughter of a marquis, but when his eyes drifted toward the flickering chandeliers and beyond, toward the alleyways that twisted through the Marais like veins, a shadow passed over his face. "Are you unwell, Your Grace?" someone asked. "Only tired," he replied, his voice a murmur of ice and silk. "The city grows loud, even in silence." And with that, he slipped away, through the gilded corridors, past the doorman who dared not speak, into the freezing dark of the Parisian night. He walked without escort. A nobleman vanishing alone into the lower quarters of the city was a scandal waiting to erupt. But Adrien no longer feared scandal, he feared becoming a relic. Snow whispered down from the heavens in soft sheets, settling on cobblestones and lamplight. It clung to the shoulders of his velvet coat and turned his polished boots dull. He crossed Pont Marie, entered the quarter of the Marais, and allowed himself to breathe. There, in the dim glow of a corner cafe, a woman's voice cut through the quiet like fire through frost. "It is not war that wounds us most," she said. "It is the apathy of those who wear crowns and do not see the bleeding." Adrien paused at the door, his gloved hand resting on the iron frame. Inside, seated near the hearth, surrounded by a modest crowd of laborers, clerks, and seamstresses, was Camille Darcy. She was not beautiful in the way noblewomen were taught to be. No powdered face or painted lips, no jewelry to catch the light. But Adrien could not look away. Her auburn hair was twisted into a loose bun, from which rebellious curls escaped and framed her flushed cheeks. Her eyes, green, luminous, defiant, burned with the kind of conviction he had long forgotten existed. She wore a plain wool dress the color of damp earth, an ink-stained shawl, and fingerless gloves. And when she spoke, every syllable danced with truth. The poor are not broken, they are abandoned. And until those in their ivory towers descend, no coin tossed from a balcony will ever buy justice. Adrien's breath caught. She spoke not to flatter, not to be adored, but to stir the soul. When the gathering ended, she rose, thanked the owner softly, and walked into the snow. Adrien did not follow. He stood alone for several minutes, the heat of her voice still in his chest, and made a decision that would unmake everything he had been. By the third day, the city's papers whispered that the Duke of Valcourt had taken ill from exhaustion and retired indefinitely to the countryside. In truth, Adrien was shedding his name like a skin. 3 weeks later, In the back room of Hôpital Sainte-Victoire, Adrien, now Dr. André Vallon, stood before a wash basin, tying the sleeves of a plain linen shirt. The room smelled of burnt laudanum and old wool. He had not touched velvet since the night of his disappearance. His boots were scuffed, his coat borrowed, and his hands, once used to sign declarations of land and law, now shook slightly as he opened a box of instruments. The clinic was quiet but for a low moan behind a door. A young boy had come in with a shattered leg. A woman, his mother perhaps, was weeping softly near the cot. Adrien stepped forward, his heart thudding not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. "You're not from around here." The voice came from the hallway, calm, observant. Adrien turned, and there she was, Camille, in a grey dress and heavy cloak, with the same copper curls and the same penetrating gaze. She held a basin in one hand and a bandage roll in the other. Recognition did not flicker in her eyes. To her, he was merely a man in need of proving himself. "I'm not," he admitted, "but I wish to be useful." She narrowed her gaze. "Then scrub your hands, doctor, and don't faint at the sight of blood. We don't have time for weak stomachs." He nodded, wordless. As he rolled up his sleeves, Camille brushed past him. Their shoulders touched barely, and Adrien felt the contact burn through his shirt like fire. She didn't look back, but he did, and in that moment, Adrien knew. The Duke of Valcourt had ceased to exist, and Dr. Vallon had just begun to live. The snow had turned to ice by the time the second week of January arrived, cloaking the narrow streets of the Marais in a treacherous silence. Outside the walls of Hôpital Sainte-Victoire, the city of Paris hummed with distant carriage wheels and the soft chiming of church bells. But within, the world had shrunk to the scent of boiled rags, rusted metal, and the quiet groans of suffering. Camille Darcy had grown used to the rhythm of the clinic, the way mornings began with frost-bitten children lined at the door, how the sick coughed in cadence during the night, and how hope arrived not in grand gestures, but in clean water, a steady hand, or a kind voice in the dark. Now that rhythm had been disrupted. The new doctor, André Vallon, he had said, moved through the halls like a man searching for his place. His coat was thick but worn, his boots too fine for mud, and his speech too precise. He never stumbled over his vowels, never mispronounced the Latin labels on the medicine jars. His posture was straight as a sword, even when carrying bandages. And yet, he never acted superior. Not once. That made him all the more suspicious. Camille watched him from the end of the corridor, where she sat beside a child burning with fever. She wrung out a cloth in lavender water and pressed it to the boy's forehead, her fingers moving with the calm of repetition. Her eyes, however, stayed on Vallon. He was attempting to boil a scalpel, emphasis on attempting. He had placed the instrument in the wrong pot and now stared at it as though the fire itself had insulted him. A frown creased his brow. He leaned closer, one hand on his hip, the other uncertain. Camille rose without a word. She crossed the room, removed the pot with a quick twist of the wrist, and replaced it with the correct one. "You'll poison him if you use that," she murmured, not unkindly. "That one is for compresses, not metal." He looked at her, startled, as though the notion of being corrected was as foreign as filth on silk. "Thank you," he said softly. "I seem to be more of a danger than a help today. Only if you keep guessing." She met his gaze firm. "Ask. We'll all breathe easier." Camille turned to go, but felt it, the hesitation in his voice, the almost imperceptible pause. "Would you show me how you prepare the poultice for burns?" he asked, eyes not arrogant, but sincere. She did not smile, but she nodded. That night, they stood together in the back room, sleeves rolled, wrists dusted in powdered roots and dried calendula. Camille guided his hands with practiced instruction. He listened, never interrupting, never claiming to know better. And though his fingers were clumsy, he moved with the awkward reverence of someone trying to be worthy. They shared few words, but silence between them began to feel like something softer than distance. Later, As they stored jars on high shelves, Camille reached up and the hem of her sleeve slipped. Adrian noticed the bracelet of faded bruises along her wrist, old, faint, nearly healed. He said nothing. She did not offer an explanation. But as she turned, the flicker of embarrassment in her eyes was quickly covered by the tilt of her chin. She was proud. Even wounded, she stood like a soldier, and he was learning. Each day that followed, Adrian arrived earlier and left later. He treated wounds, administered laudanum, cleaned bedpans, and held the hands of dying men. Camille remained observant. She saw the way he took too long reading the dosage labels, as if translating them. The way he hesitated before stitching, as though recalling it rather than knowing it. She watched him burn his fingers, trying to relight the hearth, and once slice his palm open while trimming a bandage. But she also saw the calluses forming on his hands. The way his boots lost their polish. The shadows under his eyes deepened, not from artifice, but exhaustion. One evening, after treating a widow with pneumonia, they sat together near the hearth in the supply room, eating slices of hard cheese and bread, too dry to call fresh. Camille leaned back, eyes half closed, the flames dancing across her features. Adrian watched her fingers, ink-stained and slender, rest against the worn fabric of her skirt. Around her neck hung a simple gold locket, its chain delicate, the surface smudged by time. He found his gaze drawn to it again and again. "May I ask, what's inside?" Her eyes opened. She didn't move. "My mother," she said quietly. "She died when I was 12. It was hers. I wear it because—" She trailed off, looked away. Adrian didn't press. He looked into the fire instead and said, "I lost someone too." Camille turned to him, her face unreadable in the firelight. "A brother, Etienne. He was younger, bright, reckless. He died in the early days of the revolution." Adrian's voice was low, steady. "The streets devoured him." "I'm sorry." "So am I." It was not an exchange of sympathy. It was a pact of understanding, wordless but complete. She handed him the last piece of bread. He broke it in half and returned one to her. Outside, the snow began to fall again. From a narrow hallway cloaked in shadow, Dr. Théo Barreau watched them. His thick spectacles caught the fire's glint. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. He had seen men play roles before, politicians who fed the poor for votes, gentlemen who touched elbows with the suffering to cleanse their conscience. But this one, there was something else in the way the young man looked at Camille. Not hunger, not guilt, devotion. Theo made a note of it, but he said nothing, for now. In the nights that followed, Adrian and Camille fell into an unspoken routine. They treated wounds, balanced ledgers, crushed herbs, and poured tea for the dying. They spoke little of themselves, but the silence began to hold things, questions, glimpses, breath. Once, as they reached for the same jar, their hands touched. Camille did not pull away. Adrian did. But as he did, he exhaled shakily. She noticed. She said nothing, and in the quiet that followed, they returned to their work. But the tension, the breathless, slow-burning gravity between them settled like dust in the folds of every hour, and neither of them dared name it. Not yet. The bitter frost of February settled over Paris like a shroud, turning its cobbled veins slick with ice and quieting even the most defiant street cries. Within the crumbling stone walls of Hôpital Sainte-Victoire, the cold lingered in corners and beneath doorways, curling under skirts and into bones. But in the small infirmary at the rear of the clinic, the air was warmed by fire and something far more perilous than flame. Camille Darcy sat at the edge of a narrow cot, gently binding a merchant's hand split open by shattered glass. Her touch was quick, efficient, yet never harsh. The man winced, muttering a half-hearted complaint, but Camille merely arched a brow. "If you prefer, I could leave it open. Infection would take care of the pain by tomorrow," she murmured. The patient chuckled despite himself. Adrien, seated across the room grinding dried comfrey root, allowed himself a faint smile. It had become their rhythm. She led with certainty, he followed with humility, and though she had not yet fully trusted him, the distance between them was no longer wide enough to call safe. In the dim light of the hearth, her profile was framed like a painting. High cheekbones dusted with fatigue, lashes casting faint shadows, auburn hair falling loose from its pins after too many hours. She wore her grey wool pelisse open, revealing a worn cotton bodice beneath, and at her throat the gold locket glinted with each movement. Adrian's gaze lingered there often. He had never asked again what it held, and she had not offered more. Later that evening, once the last patient was gone, and the clinic had quieted to nothing but the ticking of the hall clock, Camille brought the ledgers into the supply room, where Adrian had lit a small oil lamp. "You wrote the numbers wrong again," she said without malice, setting the book beside him. "I had hoped you wouldn't notice." "I notice everything." She leaned on the table beside him, close enough that the faint scent of lavender soap rose from her skin. He looked up from the page, and for the first time that day, their eyes met without the buffer of duty. "Do you ever sleep, Camille?" he asked, voice low. "Only when my body demands it, but my mind rarely rests." She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment, silence reigned, not the awkward kind, but the quiet that settles when two people have grown used to each other's presence. When she spoke again, her tone was softer than usual. "My father used to say that rest is a luxury for those who can afford indifference." Adrian's brows lifted slightly. "Your father?" She hesitated. Something in her stiffened like a drawbridge lifting. But then she sighed, as though tired of carrying the weight alone. "He was a lawyer, a good one, fierce, brilliant. He defended the workers during the early days of the revolution. He believed in liberty and justice, not in theory, but in the marrow of his bones. People adored him." Her voice wavered then, so slightly Adrian almost missed it. "And what happened to him?" he asked. "They exiled him. When the tides turned, he was too bold for the royalists, too principled for the opportunists. Now he lives in Marseille, an old man alone, bitter, afraid he failed." Adrian watched her closely. "Do you visit him?" Camille shook her head. "He doesn't want to see me. He said if I were wise, I'd abandon his ideals and marry someone safe. Settle. Be quiet. I think he fears watching me become what he used to be." She blinked, and for the first time, Adrian saw not just strength in her gaze, but sorrow. "I don't want to be hard, Dr. Vallon," she whispered, "but the world keeps handing me reasons to be." Adrien set down his pen. The words that rose in his chest surprised him. They did not belong to the Duke of Valcourt, who once spoke only in polished riddles and rehearsed charm. These words were raw. "I lost someone too." Camille stilled. Her eyes, no longer guarded, searched his. "My brother, Etienne." He paused, as though speaking the name out loud cost him breath. "He was younger than me, restless, brave. He marched in the streets long before I understood why. He called me a coward once for staying behind the gates. He died during the September massacres." Camille's hand, resting on the ledger, curled slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "So am I. I watched the world break him, and then I built a life far away from the ruins." The fire cracked between them. They were two people shaped by loss. Two souls who had tried in their own ways to build something after everything familiar had turned to ash. She rose slowly, crossing the room to the cabinet of gauze and tinctures. He watched her, his chest tight with something he could not name. "Will you help me with this?" she asked. He joined her at the narrow table, where a bundle of bloodied bandages waited. They worked in tandem, unwrapping, rinsing, cutting clean strips by lamplight. At one point, they both reached for the same cloth. Their fingers touched, not a graze, not an accident, a contact that lingered. Adrian's breath caught. Camille looked up, her lips slightly parted, not in surprise, but in awareness. Their hands remained still, suspended between linen and longing. Her skin was warm beneath his. His pulse pounded, but neither moved. The weight of it, the fragile, silent acknowledgement of something blooming between them hung thick in the air. Then, quietly, Adrian stepped back. Camille said nothing, but the curve of her neck as she turned away betrayed a tension she didn't voice. Moments later, she spoke again, calm but distant. "We'll need more laudanum by week's end. The distributor in Montreuil will only hold it if I go in person." "I'll accompany you," Adrian offered. "That won't be necessary." He nodded, stung by her return to formality. But he understood. The distance had returned. As Camille gathered the remaining supplies, Adrian remained by the table, his hand still tingling with the memory of hers. Just beyond the door, in the corridor cloaked with candlelight, Dr. Theo Béraud leaned against the wall. He had seen enough. When Adrian exited the room sometime later, Theo blocked his path. "She's not a prize to be won, Doctor," he said, voice gravelly. "And this isn't a stage." Adrian met his gaze, startled. "I beg your pardon." "You may have fooled the rest with your rough coat and calloused hands," Theo continued, arms crossed. "But I've seen too many men hide behind noble lies. You're not the first man who thought a costume could rewrite his soul." Adrian's jaw tensed. "I'm not pretending to be someone I'm not." Theo studied him. Then, with a quiet scoff, he stepped aside. "I hope, for her sake, that's true." Adrian did not reply. He walked past him, the weight of the physician's words heavy on his shoulders. In the room he left behind, Camille sat at the small desk, staring at the flame of the oil lamp. Her fingers rested over her locket. She didn't know what frightened her more, that she was beginning to feel something for the new doctor, or that she had no idea who he truly was. The sky over Paris had shifted from iron grey to gold-edged slate, heralding the onset of early spring. Yet the wind still bit with the teeth of winter, and the streets remained wet with thawed snow and secrets. In the corridors of Hôpital Sainte-Victoire, time moved to the rhythm of coughing fits, clinking vials, and quiet footsteps. But on the other side of the Seine, in the manicured halls of Versailles, time was frozen in opulence, where silence was gilded and appearances were polished to a mirror's gleam. It had been 3 weeks since Adrien de Valcourt, known to the world as a duke, had walked away from his name. 3 weeks as Dr. Vallon, with a worn coat on his back and a growing hunger in his soul he dared not name. Yet a single letter, sealed in gold wax, summoned him back into a world he had come to dread. It arrived in the early morning, while Camille was changing a poultice on a merchant's swollen leg. Adrian recognized the handwriting before he even broke the seal. It read only one line: "Your absence has become louder than your presence." The message was clear. If he did not return to court, the rumors would devour what reputation remained of House Valcourt, and with it, his ability to protect the charitable works he had silently funded through a maze of names and trusts. It was not just his pride at risk, it was the very institution he was beginning to believe in. So, he left. No explanations, no farewells. Only a note pinned to the inside of the supply cabinet that read, "An urgent matter calls me away. I shall return shortly. A.V." Camille found it at dusk. She stared at the paper for a long time, unmoving, then folded it into her apron pocket. Her jaw tightened. Her hands returned to work. She did not ask questions aloud, but in her heart a familiar ache bloomed. Disappointment. In Versailles, Adrien de Valcourt was resurrected like a ghost in brocade. The gala held in his honor was a spectacle of artifice. Waltzes spun beneath glittering chandeliers, crystal clinking against crystal, murmurs weaving beneath orchestral swells. The palace pulsed with perfume and speculation. He arrived cloaked in blue velvet, his white cravat a sculpted knot of precision. His sash, embroidered in silver thread, shimmered beneath the candlelight. The seal of Valcourt rested on his breast, and his face bore the mask he had worn for years, the perfect expression of detached civility. Heads turned, whispers surged like tidewater. "Is it truly him? He's thinner, don't you think?" Rumors say he's been abroad, recuperating from a nervous illness. No, I heard it was a mistress, some little actress hidden away in the countryside. Adrian heard them all. He let them pass through him like wind through an open window. Only once did his composure falter, when a marquis's daughter leaned close and whispered with a smirk, "You disappear too easily, mon duc. One might think you're hiding something, or someone." He offered her the faintest smile and retreated to a corner of the hall, where a mirror framed in gilt caught his reflection. And for a fleeting moment, he didn't recognize the man standing there. A single night. That was all he would give them. The next morning, long before the palace awoke, Adrien departed Versailles without ceremony, shedding the garments of nobility like a skin he no longer wished to wear. He returned to the Marais under a grey sky, the familiar sounds of carriage wheels over wet stone guiding him home. But home had changed. Camille was waiting for him, not with questions, but with fury veiled in ice. "You left," she said, standing in the hallway of the clinic, arms folded tightly over her chest. "And not for a night, for 5. He said nothing. Her eyes were sharp, but there was pain beneath their fire. "Patients asked for you. A child died waiting for help we couldn't give in time. We were overwhelmed, and you were gone." Still, silence. Camille stepped closer, the fabric of her dress brushing softly against his coat. Her voice dropped lower. "You could have told me. You could have trusted me with the truth, unless there was never trust between us to begin with." Adrian looked at her then, truly looked. Her cheeks were flushed with frustration, her lashes damp with fatigue. The locket around her neck rose and fell with each breath. Her hands, always steady, now trembled. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the words formed stones in his mouth. If he told her where he had been, she would see not just a lie, but the man he truly was. A man who had worn masks so long he feared he no longer knew his own face. A man who had failed to choose between privilege and principle. So he stood there silent, letting her draw her conclusions. Camille exhaled sharply, stepping back. Her voice, when she spoke again, was cold. "Then I'll draw my own conclusion. You are exactly like every man who walks in here pretending to care until the moment it costs him something." And with that, she turned and walked away. That night, Paris held its breath. Adrian sat alone in the physician's quarters, the lamplight flickering against the stone walls. The scent of burned herbs lingered in the air. He stared at his reflection in the dark glass of the window, no longer in brocade, but in the plain linen of a man he wished to become. On the table beside him lay the newest issue of Le Courrier Républicain. The headline burned into his vision: "The Disappearing Duke. Silence in the Face of Suffering." By Camille Darcy. He read every line. Each word was a blade carved with precision. It was not slander, it was truth veiled as critique, elegant, devastating, and entirely deserved. Yet beneath the sharp language was a grief he recognized, the kind that comes when someone dares to believe in something, even for a moment, and finds only shadows. Adrian folded the paper with care and placed it beside the cold lamp. In the distance, a bell tolled midnight. He did not sleep. The following morning, the clinic opened its doors at dawn. Camille passed Adrien in the hallway without so much as a glance. He watched her braid her hair back with trembling fingers and steady herself with a breath before seeing patience. He longed to reach out, to say her name, but words had betrayed him once. He would not let them do so again. So he did what he could. He stayed, he worked, he waited. And in the quiet spaces between tasks and conversations, he let the weight of his silence settle like ash, not yet knowing if what had broken between them could ever be made whole. The sky over Paris wept snow again, not with the soft elegance of winter's early arrival, but with the cruel, relentless weight of late March. The kind of snow that carried no beauty, only burden. It clung to rooftops like grief, fell in thick silence over market stalls and church domes, and buried even the sound of horseshoes on cobblestones. Camille Darcy did not feel the cold. Her boots, soaked through, slipped more than once on the frozen street as she pushed forward through the slush of the Rue des Ormes. In her gloved hands, she held a small parcel of glass bottles, tightly wrapped and cradled against her chest. Laudanum, caraway tincture, syrup of poppy. They were meant for a child with lungs too weak to cry. She had left the clinic at first light, determined to reach the tenement before the worst of the storm returned. But the walk had been longer than expected. The wind crueler, the snow heavier. She had delivered the medicine, but now on the return her vision blurred, her skin burned beneath her wool coat. Her breath came short. She had not eaten, she had not slept. And her body, defiant for so long, finally betrayed her. In front of a shuttered bakery, beneath a wrought iron lantern buried in frost, she fell to her knees. Her gloved hands broke her fall, but not completely. The snow soaked through her skirts, then her petticoats, until the cold reached her bones. Then came the spinning. The street tilted. The sounds of Paris faded. She did not cry out. She collapsed without a sound. When Adrian found her, she was crumpled against the base of a broken fountain, half buried in snow. Her face was pale, her lips tinged with blue, her lashes dusted with frost. She had tried to protect the medicine. It lay beside her, untouched, still wrapped. He did not hesitate. He gathered her into his arms, her weight terrifyingly light. She did not stir, her head lolled against his chest, her breathing shallow. Adrian did not feel the cold as he ran. People turned to look, but no one stopped him. A man with eyes wild, cradling a woman in his arms, moving through the snow like a madman. By the time he burst into the clinic, his breath came in gasps, and his voice cracked as he shouted for help. "Berode! Towels! Water! She's burning! She's burning alive!" They laid her on the cot in the back room. The hearth was lit, and Adrian stripped off her soaked outer layers with trembling hands, careful, reverent. Beneath the fabric, her skin radiated heat. Sweat clung to her neck. Her hair had come loose, curling around her cheeks like copper threads. Dr. Berode came swiftly, gruff and exacting. But it was Adrian who refused to leave her side. He bathed her forehead with cool cloths, held her hand through the tremors, whispered her name over and over, as though it might call her back. "Camille, Camille, please." For 3 days and 3 nights, he did not leave. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He only stayed beside her, watching her chest rise and fall, sometimes with difficulty, sometimes with peace. In her fever she murmured, broken phrases, fragments of childhood memories, sorrow-soaked thoughts that should never have been heard aloud. "I hated the dark when my father left." She cried for hours when the fever took her. "He said the revolution would save us, but it didn't." And once, only once, she whispered his name. Not Dr. Vallon, but Adrian. He froze. It was not an accusation. It was not even spoken with full awareness. It was longing, or memory, or perhaps the fragile edge of some truth she had not yet fully uncovered. Adrian reached forward with aching hands and brushed a damp curl from her temple. His fingertips lingered, trembling as they moved down her cheek to the hollow of her throat where the familiar gold locket rested, tarnished now, warmed by fever. He touched it, just once. "I never meant to lie to you," he whispered, voice like threadbare silk. "I only wanted to understand what it meant to care without being seen. To be a man who heals, not commands." She made a small sound, half sigh, half moan. Adrian leaned closer. "If I were only a doctor, Camille, perhaps then you could love me." It was the closest he had come to admitting anything, and he knew it would never be said again. The locket pulsed with warmth beneath his palm. When she finally woke, the fire had dimmed to embers, and the snow had turned to rain beyond the windows. Her eyes fluttered open, dazed, glassy, searching. He was there, still by her side. Their gazes met. He did not speak. He only rose from the chair and lowered himself to the edge of her cot, his hand hesitant near hers. She blinked slowly, as though trying to remember where she was. Then recognition bloomed, soft but certain. "You stayed," she murmured, her voice no more than breath. "Of course I did." Her eyes filled, not with tears but with something deeper. She looked at him as if seeing him differently, or perhaps clearly for the first time. He reached for her hand. Their fingers touched lightly, reverently. Camille's breath caught, and then, without decision, without thought, she tilted her head slightly. Her lips parted, dry, pale, but full of something unspeakably tender. Adrian leaned in. The world shrank to the space between them. The fire whispered behind them. Their breath mingled. And then, just before their lips could meet, he pulled away. It was not hesitation. It was torment. He stood quickly, the air between them now thick with something almost unbearable. "I should fetch more water," he said hoarsely, not meeting her gaze. She stared at the place where he had been seated. Her hand, still half raised, fell slowly to the blanket. Behind the curtain in the hall beyond, Dr. Theo Béraud leaned against the wall, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. When Adrian stepped out, Béraud was waiting. 3 days, the elder physician muttered. No rest, no breath. "You nearly broke yourself to keep her here." "I couldn't leave her," Adrian said simply. "No," Béraud replied. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Adrian said nothing. Béraud's voice dropped. "You've had your lesson, boy. Leave now, or tell her the truth before she learns it from someone crueler." Adrian looked away, not in defiance, but in guilt. The guilt of a man who had wanted to be more than what he was, and had instead become something far more dangerous. A coward with a noble heart. A liar with honest hands, and a man, now, who loved a woman who deserved to be loved without secrets. The air in the Marais was thick with the scent of smoke and the shouts of men whose patience had been worn to threadbare rags. What began as whispers in taverns had grown into thunder, rumors of corrupt magistrates, rising bread prices, and one more family evicted into the street. It only took a single spark to set the streets ablaze with fury. That spark came on a Thursday. By nightfall, the quarter pulsed with unrest. Windows were shuttered, doors barred, fires flickered in barrels at the edges of the alleys. The sound of boots, angry and uncoordinated, echoed against brick. A protest had turned into a mob, and in the middle of it, without uniform or command, stood Adrien, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, coat already stained with ash. He had heard the cry from the corner of Rue des Fontaines. A man had fallen, a vendor Camille often bought herbs from, struck down by a blow he never saw coming. Adrien did not hesitate. He pushed through the crowd, knelt beside the man, and pressed both hands to the bleeding wound at his temple. "Hold still," Adrien ordered, voice low but unyielding. "You're not dying tonight." The crowd shifted, grew louder. Someone threw a bottle. Someone else screamed. The fire crackled closer. In the chaos, a hand tore at Adrian's shoulder, then another. Not in attack, but in desperation. Someone trying to climb over him, trampling bodies for escape. The sleeve of his coat ripped. It wasn't the tear itself that mattered. It was what the tear revealed. Fine stitching, velvet embroidery, a gold thread hidden beneath the wool, out of place in this part of Paris. So subtle, it might have gone unnoticed, but Camille saw it. She had arrived seconds earlier, rushing toward the commotion with her satchel clutched in one hand, fear tightening every breath. She stopped short when her eyes landed on Adrien, just as his coat fell open beneath the strain. And there it was, not a symbol, not a title, but a truth. Noble, royal, a lie, stitched by omission. Her steps faltered. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Adrien looked up. Their eyes met. Camille turned. She ran. He left the wounded man in the care of a passing gendarme and followed her, not calling her name, but keeping his distance, through the smoke, down the side streets, around the edges of crumbling buildings. She moved fast, driven not by danger, but devastation. At the corner of Rue de Charonne, she stopped. A carriage waited in the shadows, black lacquer glinting beneath the gaslight. The door opened without instruction. The crest stamped in gold on the side panel needed no explanation. Valcourt. Camille, breathless, hidden by the alley's mouth, watched as Adrien approached. He didn't glance around, didn't pause. He stepped into the carriage like a man returning to a cage he once built himself, and the door closed behind him. The wheels turned, and he was gone. Camille stood alone, her hands shaking. She did not weep. She returned to the clinic without speaking, passed through the doors like a ghost, climbed the narrow stairwell to the room she sometimes used when working late. She sat on the edge of the bed. Then she reached for the chain around her neck, and with trembling fingers she unclasped the locket. She stared at it, the gold no longer warm, the memory inside blurred by fever, by hope, by lies. She set it on the table and left it there. When Adrien returned the next morning, the clinic was quieter than usual. The unrest in the streets had burned out, leaving behind ash, arrests, and silence. Camille was already working. She moved like a woman forged from iron, calm, efficient, and cold. She did not look at him. She did not speak. Adrien waited until the hallway was clear, then followed her into the storage room. "Camille," he said softly. She turned. Her face, so often a tapestry of warmth and fire, was blank. "Don't," she said. "I need to explain. You had the chance. I was going to tell you." "When?" she snapped. "After another lie, another missing day. Another patient died because you vanished, and I defended you. I defended the doctor. I trusted the man who washed floors and boiled water and held a dying child's hand. But the man who stepped into that carriage..." Her voice cracked. "That man wore a crest." Adrien stepped closer, but she raised a hand. "You lied with your hands," she said, voice low, shaking. "With your silence. With everything. Please, don't beg," she whispered. "It's beneath both of us." He reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He placed it gently on the table beside her. The locket. Camille stared at it. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. "But you did." A pause. Then she nodded slowly. "Tell me your name," she demanded. He hesitated. "Not the one you borrowed. The real one." He drew a breath. "Adrien de Valcourt." She laughed. Not from amusement, but disbelief. "Do you know how many nights I sat in this room, wondering why someone like you had such soft hands, such perfect speech, such strange eyes? I told myself you were an exiled noble, a foreign scholar, a man grieving something unspoken. I told myself stories to protect my heart." She turned to him, eyes full and bright with restrained pain. "But the truth was worse. You were exactly what I feared." He stepped forward, the distance between them fragile as thread. "I didn't come here to deceive you. I came to become something else, and I failed." "You didn't fail," she whispered. "You chose." Her voice cracked again. "And now I choose too." She picked up the locket, held it in her palm, then gently placed it back on the table. "I don't wear symbols of people who hide behind them." Adrien reached out. She stepped back. The look on her face was not hatred. It was heartbreak. "I love the doctor," she said. "I don't know the Duke." She turned away, walking past him, not looking back, and Adrien stood alone in the room, the locket between them, still warm from her skin. The morning Camille Darcy resigned from Hôpital Sainte-Victoire, the city of Paris awoke under a sky the color of smoke. It did not rain, but the air tasted of it, heavy, damp, as though the heavens themselves held their breath. Spring had arrived, yes, but not with blossoms, with silence. Camille did not speak a word as she packed her things. No farewell, no justification, no apology. Only the soft rustle of linen, the creak of drawers, the muted echo of footsteps on worn wooden floors. She left the folded note on Dr. Barraud's desk. "My time here ends today. The patients deserve truth. I no longer know where to find it." Then she walked out, her satchel slung across one shoulder, her hair pinned up in careful defiance. The locket did not hang around her neck. It remained in the back room, beside the jar of calendula, untouched. Camille's garret apartment overlooked a crumbling courtyard where pigeons nested in the guttering and the scent of overcooked cabbage drifted up from the bakery below. The room itself was narrow, sloped and sun-starved. A single window blinked weakly against the morning light, but inside it was alive with ink, paper and the soft scratch of a pen dancing toward vengeance. She wrote without pause, without breathing. The fury moved through her like a tide. Every sentence carved from betrayal, every line dipped in pain. She did not name him, not directly, but everyone who read it would know. The editorial she penned was titled, "The Hypocrite's Hands." She began not with accusation but with confession. There was once a man who wrapped himself in humility, who scrubbed floors and whispered comfort to the dying, who wore a false name and true gentleness. I believed in him. I trusted him with the fragile weight of faith. I gave him what the world had taught me never to give again, hope. The ink soaked deep into the page, staining not just the paper, but her fingers. But lies told without words are the most dangerous kind. They slip into the bloodstream. They become part of the air, and when they are revealed, not with admission but with accident, they unravel everything. She wrote for hours, until the light faded and her hand cramped and her eyes stung. She did not cry, not once. She had nothing left to spare. It was Mrs. Violette Lenoir, her landlady and reluctant guardian angel, who knocked on her door as the evening bells tolled from St. Paul. Camille opened it, pale and red-eyed, with ink still fresh on her knuckles. "I brought tea," Violette said softly, lifting a tray that trembled ever so slightly in her hands. Camille stepped aside. They sat at the edge of the bed, the tiny room smelling of parchment and mint. Violette poured the tea in silence, then handed Camille a cup with a look that bore neither pity nor judgment, only understanding. "I read it," the older woman said, her voice like worn velvet. "The editorial. You're going to set half the salons of Paris on fire." "I hope so," Camille answered flatly. Violette nodded, sipping her tea. Then she said, almost casually, "I once loved a man who lied to me." Camille blinked. "I was younger than you. He was a violinist, hands like Grace. He told me he had a modest position in the orchestra. It was true in part. What he didn't say was that he was married, with children. He never told me a falsehood, but he let me build a fantasy and lived inside it with me for months." "What did you do?" Camille asked, voice hoarse. "I left him," Violette said, "but I never forgot him, because some lies are cruel and some are born of longing. The longing to be better than we were raised to be. The longing to live a truth that might not yet belong to us." Camille stared at the steam curling from her cup. "Are you saying I should forgive him?" "I'm saying that not all wounds are meant to be kept open." Violette's eyes were soft but firm. "I'm saying that the heart can ache in many directions at once." They said nothing for a long while. When Violette left, she kissed Camille's brow, like a mother blessing a child before sleep. Camille sat alone in the fading light, her eyes drifting to the manuscript on the desk, its ink still damp. She did not touch it, but she did not burn it either. Across the city, in a private study filled with silence and regret, Adrien de Valcourt sat behind a mahogany desk carved with the seal of his house. The hearth beside him burned low. The air smelled of smoke and wax. In front of him lay a copy of Le Courrier Républicain, creased again, then smoothed flat until the words stared up at him like judgment, a redacted version. Dr. Barreau had delivered it by hand, his mouth a tight line, his coat still dusted with ash from the recent riots. "She wrote it," he said simply, "because no one else could." Adrien said nothing. Barreau stood by the fire for a moment longer, then turned to leave. But at the door, he paused. "She still wears your silence like a wound, not because you lied, but because she believed you might not." Then he left. Adrian did not read the article a second time. He didn't have to. He had memorized every word. Beside the paper on the desk sat the locket, still closed, still hers, still glowing faintly with the warmth of her skin, or perhaps only the memory of it. He reached out, not to open it, but to touch it, as one might touch the edge of something holy or forbidden. "I never wanted her to see the Duke," he whispered into the empty room. "Only the man." His voice cracked at the edges, but no one heard it, and the fire burned low. The countryside beyond Paris bloomed reluctantly under the pale weight of early spring. Wildflowers stirred in the breeze, uncertain of the season's sincerity, and the trees along the stone road to the Valcourt estate stood bare but proud, like sentinels awaiting the return of something long absent. Adrien de Valcourt had not passed through those gates in over 2 years, and when he did, it was not as a duke reclaiming his throne. It was as a man who had forgotten what it meant to belong to anything at all. The chateau was quiet. Servants moved in hushed patterns, their eyes lowered not out of obedience, but reverence. Rumors had reached them before their master returned. Rumors of a scandal, a woman, a withdrawal from court life. But Adrien asked for no explanations, and no one dared offer one. He occupied the western wing, where the rooms had once been filled with the laughter of his mother and the concerts of his brother Etienne. Those rooms now stood closed, covered in dust, the past tucked behind silk-draped doors. Adrien did not seek comfort in music or wine or politics. He sought a desk, a quill, and the space to bleed the truth he had failed to speak aloud. He wrote to Camille, not once, not twice, but 43 times. Each letter began with her name, only her name, written with trembling hands and ink that dried too fast. Some were only a few lines, others spanned pages. He wrote in daylight, by candlelight, during storms and stillness. He wrote of the man he had been, and the man he had tried to become, and the man he feared she would never forgive. He wrote about Etienne, about his father's cold ambition, about the emptiness of the title he carried like a chain around his neck. He wrote of her voice, the way it cut through smoke and lies, of her hands, ink-stained and resolute, of her silence, and still he never sent them. They filled a drawer he never locked, a drawer that became, over time, the only place in the house where he dared place hope. One morning, as light spilled into the study through a window left open to birdsong, Adrien took out a fresh sheet of parchment, not for a letter but for a plan. Maison de Miséricorde, a hospital, a refuge. A place without titles or crests or polished boots, a sanctuary named not for himself, but for Elise Darcy, the woman who had raised Camille to fight for those the world preferred to forget. He wrote the dedication in full at the top of the document. In memory of a mother's grace and a daughter's courage, he spared no expense. He bought land on the southern edge of the city, near the river where the fog thickened in the early hours. He commissioned builders, hired physicians who had once worked in secret to heal revolutionaries, and invited midwives, herbalists, and nurses to walk through the doors of a building that would never turn away the poor. He visited the construction site every morning. He walked among the workers, boots caked in mud, sleeves rolled, speaking not as Valcourt, but as Adrien. Some recognized him, most didn't, but none dared question his resolve. Weeks passed. When the scaffolding was taken down, the plaque was placed above the entrance. Maison de Miséricorde pour Elise Darcy. The city took notice. Newspapers printed cautious headlines. A nobleman's penance, one read. The Duke's redemption project, another suggested with suspicion barely veiled. But Adrien did not offer statements. Instead, he returned to his desk and wrote one final letter. This one, he signed. Camille, if you ever wish to heal me, I shall be where your heart once lived. A. He folded the letter himself, sealed it with no crest, sent it not by footman or courier, but by a modest post service with no return address. It arrived 3 days later. Camille stood in her apartment, bare feet brushing the worn rug near her desk, when she opened the envelope. The handwriting, sharp, elegant, unmistakable, struck something deep within her. She read the letter once, then again, then again. Her fingers trembled, not with rage, not even with sadness, with the unbearable weight of memory. She set the letter down, reached for a match, struck it, and touched it to the paper. The flame curled around the parchment slowly, as if reluctant to destroy something so fragile. She watched the ink vanish, line by line, word by word, until all that remained were ashes, curled and blackened, in the ceramic dish she once used to mix tea leaves. And still, she stared, not at the destruction, but at the space it left behind. Because for all her fury, all her pride, all the vows she had made to forget him, she could not look away. Paris had grown quiet under the veil of a soft spring night. The streets glistened with the residue of earlier rain, their stones slick beneath moonlight, their shadows drawn long across closed shutters and sleeping doorways. It was the kind of night where the city seemed to hold its breath, watching, listening, waiting. Camille Darcy stood beneath the familiar arch of Hôpital Sainte-Victoire, her fingers resting lightly on the rusted handle of the front door. She had not stepped foot inside for over a fortnight, and yet her feet had brought her there almost against her will. The satchel she had forgotten, left tucked behind the apothecary shelf, filled with scribbled patient notes, dried herbs, and a broken ink pot, had been the excuse. But it was not what had kept her walking for nearly an hour through the sleeping city. She had told herself she was only retrieving what belonged to her, and yet her heart beat with the unmistakable rhythm of hesitation. She opened the door. The hinges creaked softly, as if startled by her return. Inside, the clinic breathed with memory. The scent of old medicine, smoke, and lavender still lingered. The oil lamps were unlit, but the light of the moon filtered through the tall windows, casting the place in silver. Then she heard it. A quiet cough, a murmured reassurance, the shuffling of fabric. She followed the sound, step by step, past the long row of cots, until she reached the last room. There he was, Adrien. He knelt on the floor beside a child no older than 7. The little boy's face pale, damp with sweat, his chest rising and falling in shallow motion. Adrien's sleeves were rolled to the elbow, his waistcoat undone, shirt wrinkled, and hands stained with poultice. A bowl of steaming water rested beside him. His voice, low and steady, filled the silence between the child's labored breaths. "You're safe now, Petit. Rest. The worst has passed." He did not notice her at first. His entire being was fixed on the child, on the fragile body clinging to warmth and comfort. Camille remained in the doorway, frozen, as something within her cracked open once more. She had seen him in so many forms, masked in brocade, broken by guilt, alight with conviction, but never like this, stripped of name, of station, of anything but care. She stepped into the room without speaking. He turned then. His eyes widened slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. His gaze met hers for only a moment before returning to the child. He said nothing. Camille crossed the room and lowered herself to the opposite side of the cot. The movement was slow, deliberate. She reached for the cloth soaking in the bowl and wrung it gently between her palms. The heat stung her fingers. Together, without exchanging a word, they worked. She cooled the boy's forehead. Adrien spooned water between his lips. They changed the bandages, soothed his limbs, adjusted the thin blanket. Their hands moved in rhythm, as if no time had passed at all, as if they had never fallen apart. Outside, the moon rose higher. Hours passed. The child finally slept, a faint smile curving on his lips. Camille sat back, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her chest ached, not from fatigue, but from the weight of the silence they had shared. It was not the silence of strangers, nor of anger. It was the silence of something waiting to be named. Adrien's voice, when it came, was barely above a breath. He wandered in alone. His mother had been taken by the guards during the riots. No name, no shoes. He hadn't spoken for days. I didn't know if he'd make it. Camille looked at the boy, then at Adrian. "You stayed," she said softly. Adrian nodded once. There was nowhere else to be. She rose to her feet, walked slowly to the window, and looked out onto the courtyard. The ivy on the stone wall had begun to bloom again. Spring was reclaiming what winter had withered. "I almost didn't come," she admitted. "I didn't expect you to." She turned, leaning lightly against the windowsill. The moonlight brushed her face, outlining the curve of her cheek, the shadows beneath her eyes. Her voice was quiet but steady. "The Duke lied to me." Adrian flinched, barely perceptible. "But the doctor..." Her gaze met his, unflinching. "The doctor never did." Adrian rose from his chair, slowly, like a man unsure if he had permission to stand. "I didn't mean to deceive you," he said, stepping closer. "Not in the beginning, not when it mattered. I came here to hide, but I stayed, because I found something worth becoming." She said nothing, only watched him. He stopped a few paces from her. "I wanted to be someone you could believe in," he continued, voice breaking. "Not because of who I was born to be, but because of what I chose to do when no one was looking." Camille swallowed. Her arms remained folded across her chest, not in defensiveness, but in restraint. He took one more step. "Everything I've done since, every moment, has been trying to find my way back to the man I was when I was beside you." The silence stretched. Camille lowered her arms. "You were never lost to me," she said. "Not completely." His breath caught. Her fingers reached into her pocket, drawing forth a small folded square. She opened it. It was the final letter, the one she had burned, or thought she had. She had rewritten it in her own hand, word for word, line for line. "I wanted to forget it," she said, "but I couldn't stop remembering." Adrienne stepped closer. Only a breath now separated them. Camille folded the paper again, gently, and returned it to her coat. Her voice, when she spoke, was softer than ever. "I can't promise forgiveness." "Not yet," he shook his head. "I'm not asking for it." She looked up at him, her gaze no longer guarded. "I'm only asking for truth. From now on, no masks, no names." Adrian lowered himself, slowly, not to embrace her, not to beg, but to kneel. His hand rested against his chest, not with apology, with reverence. "I swear it," he said, voice rough. "On my brother's name, on yours." Camille closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand over his. Warm, steady. The child stirred behind them, then settled again. And outside, the first light of dawn began to touch the city of Paris. The morning sun rose pale over the rooftops of Paris, its light spreading like honey across the stone facades and peeling shutters of the southern quarter. A quiet hush clung to the streets around the Maison de Miséricorde, broken only by the soft rustling of carriages arriving one by one, their wheels grinding on gravel, their occupants peering curiously through lace-covered windows. Above the main entrance, the newly affixed plaque caught the early light. Maison de Miséricorde pour Élise Darcy. There was no crest, no signature, only the name of a woman long gone, and the memory of her quiet fight for dignity. Inside, the grand hall, modest in design but rich in intention, had been dressed not with garlands or banners, but with rows of simple wooden chairs, all facing a small platform near the central hearth. Clay vases held freshly cut branches of lilac and rosemary, filling the air with fragrance rather than fanfare. The crowd that gathered was a curious tapestry. Noble women in pearls and silk gloves sat stiffly beside washerwomen in patched shawls. Young physicians in pressed coats stood beside seamstresses and retired soldiers, all drawn by the whispers that had swept through the city for weeks. The Duke of Valcourt had built a hospital for the poor. Some called it atonement, others called it madness. Camille Darcy stood just behind the curtains of a side vestibule, watching the seats fill, her fingers nervously twisting the chain around her neck. For the first time in weeks, the gold locket, polished and repaired, rested once more against her skin. It had been Adrian's doing, not with fanfare or apology, simply left on her doorstep, resting atop a folded note she had never opened. She did not need to. The locket spoke for him, and she had chosen to wear it today. Across the room, Adrien de Valcourt paced quietly beside a physician from the new staff. He wore no sash, no cravat of state, just a simple grey coat, his dark hair brushed back with restraint, his face somber and unreadable. If anyone had expected the return of a duke, they would be disappointed. He was not here to be celebrated. He was here to open a door, one that had remained closed for too long. When the last guest had taken their seat, the murmurs died down. Camille stepped forward, her boots echoing softly against the clean stone floor. She climbed the platform alone. For a long moment, she did not speak. She looked out at the faces before her, the curious, the skeptical, the hopeful. Then she began. "There was a time," she said, her voice clear but tender, "when people like me had no place to go but the streets, when illness, grief, or poverty were considered moral failings, when hands that ached were left to tremble alone." She paused, glancing toward the plaque on the wall. "My mother believed in mercy without condition, in justice without reward. She taught me that the greatest healing often begins with being seen." A murmur stirred in the crowd. Camille's gaze swept toward Adrien, only briefly. "There was also a time," she continued, her voice steady, "when I believed healing was a task for others, when I thought mercy was weakness, but I was wrong." She stepped down from the platform. "I stand here not as a journalist, not as the daughter of a revolutionary, but as someone who was broken and put back together, not by wealth or power or promises, but by the quiet work of hands that had once only known privilege and chose instead to serve." She looked toward Adrien again. This time, she did not look away. The crowd shifted with whispers. Some nobles frowned, offended. Others nodded slowly. The poor in the audience listened in reverent silence. Adrien stepped forward at last. He did not ascend the platform. He did not raise his voice. "I built these walls because I was taught to build palaces," he said, "but palaces do not keep out sorrow. And I have lived too long behind doors that kept me safe while others suffered." His hands remained at his sides, open, bare. "This place was not built to redeem me. It was built to honor a woman who raised a daughter with fire in her voice, and to honor that daughter's fight with something more than regret." Silence fell again, heavy but full. Then, slowly, the room erupted into applause. Some hesitant, some tearful, and a few, especially from the nobles, refusing altogether. But Adrien did not watch them. He watched Camille. That evening, long after the visitors had departed and the lanterns had been dimmed to a soft golden glow, Adrien stood alone in the main hallway of the hospital. The scent of rosemary still lingered. The floor gleamed with the faint reflection of light. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Camille stepped into the corridor, her cloak unfastened, the locket resting visibly at her collarbone. Her face was flushed not with shyness, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had found peace in what once wounded. They said nothing for a moment. Then Adrien held out his hand. Camille took it. No words, no music. He placed his other hand gently at her waist, and they began to move, slowly, tentatively, as if learning a language neither had spoken in years. They danced alone in the silence of the hospital, the shadows of their bodies flickering against the candle-lit walls, not as duke and journalist, but as man and woman, flawed, scarred, whole. Their steps were unhurried, their breaths synchronized. The past lingered behind them, not forgotten, but no longer in command. When their movement finally stilled, Camille rested her forehead against his. "You've changed," she whispered. "So have you." She smiled, barely but truthfully. And in the stillness of that moment, they understood that they had not returned to what they once were. They had rewritten everything, together. Paris, summer of 1829, breathed with a gentler rhythm than it had in years past. The smoke of revolution had faded into memory, replaced now by the scent of jasmine curling from open windows and the occasional laughter of children playing near fountains no longer stained by unrest. The Maison de Miséricorde stood unchanged in silhouette, though within its walls, time had left tender fingerprints. The wood was more worn, the corners softer with age and use. But the halls still echoed with footsteps of purpose, with quiet prayers and the rustle of linens and letters and lives in motion. On the western side of the building, beyond the courtyard where lilacs bloomed and vines climbed along the stone, stood a garden. It was not grand. It had been planted by hands unused to dirt, by a man who had once worn rings and gloves, and nurtured by a woman who believed in wild things learning to grow. Camille Darcy Valcourt sat on a wooden bench beneath the shade of a pear tree, a book resting unopened on her lap. Her hair, still auburn though streaked now with hints of sun and silver, was braided loosely down her back. At her neck hung the familiar gold locket, dulled only slightly by the years, its chain woven through the delicate lace of her dress. From the path behind her, 2 children came running. Elise, age 7, was a whirlwind of green eyes and defiant curls. She held a magnifying glass in one hand and a scolding expression on her face as she chased her younger brother. "Etienne, you dropped the beetle again." "I didn't drop it," the boy protested, cheeks flushed with mischief. "He escaped." Camille caught them both as they tumbled toward her, wrapping her arms around them with practiced ease. "Is this poor beetle part of your science lesson?" she asked, raising an amused brow. "It's a prisoner," Elise said gravely. "He was trespassing in the rosemary." Camille laughed softly. "Then perhaps we'll pardon him for good behavior." From the garden path, Adrien approached, sleeves rolled, hair grayer at the temples, but his posture still elegant, his presence still magnetic. He carried a small basket of fresh bandages from the infirmary, but paused at the sight of the 3 most important people in his world gathered beneath the tree. Their eyes met, Camille's and Adrien's, and held. It had been 8 years since the day she returned to the clinic. 8 years since they chose to begin again, not with promises, but with labor, with forgiveness that unfolded slowly, like parchment left out in the sun. Adrien joined them, placing the basket aside and lowering himself beside her. "The city council approved the expansion," he murmured, brushing his hand over Camille's. "The new wing will bear your name this time." Camille shook her head gently. "It doesn't need to." "It does," he said simply. "You changed the world with a pen before we had bricks to build with." She looked at him, her gaze soft. "And you changed it with silence," she whispered. "And with what you built when you could have walked away." The children had wandered off, chasing the forgiving beetle once more. The garden around them shimmered with life. A nurse passed nearby, greeting them both with a nod. In the distance, church bells rang noon. Dr. Théo Barreau had passed on 3 winters ago. His funeral had been quiet, attended by former patients, Camille, Adrien, and a choir of orphans who now bore his name over the school he helped fund with his final will. Mrs. Violette Lenoir still sent letters from the coast, where she now lived with her sister. Her handwriting remained immaculate. Her wit had not dulled. Society had changed, slowly. The poorest quarters now had clinics of their own. Nobles no longer ignored the press. A new generation of women, many inspired by Camille's columns, had taken up pens and protest. But not everyone escaped the weight of time. Some of Adrien's former peers had turned their backs on him permanently. Others had whispered his name with a mixture of disdain and admiration. He no longer cared. He had paid the price for his silence. And in return, he had earned something far greater. Camille reached for his hand. They sat there quietly, watching their children disappear into the tall grass, into a world neither of them could control, but both of them had helped reshape. "The world is still cruel," she said softly. Adrian nodded. But we gave it something gentler. Their shadows stretched across the garden path, falling side by side, not Duke and journalist, but husband and wife, father and mother, healer and writer. Two souls who had once found each other in the ruins and had chosen again and again to build something stronger in their place. The past no longer ruled them, and the future, wild and uncertain, had never looked more beautiful. Finn. Some stories are not about grand declarations or perfect endings. They are about choice. The choice to stay when it's easier to leave, to forgive when silence feels safer, to love, not the fantasy, but the truth of someone. Flawed, beautiful, whole. Camille and Adrian's journey wasn't just about a romance. It was about two souls daring to rebuild after everything had crumbled. About letting go of pride, about rewriting the future with hands once stained by the past. If this story touched your heart, if you walked with them through heartbreak, healing, and hope, I invite you to leave a single word in the comments. Mercy. That one word tells me you were here until the very last line, and it helps this story travel further, reaching others who believe in the power of second chances. And if you'd like to support the team who brings these emotional journeys to life, you can now send a super thanks right here on YouTube. Any amount, small or generous, helps us continue telling stories that matter. We're deeply grateful for every gesture of support. But if that's not possible for you today, don't worry. Your presence means everything. You can still help by sharing this video with someone you know who loves period dramas, timeless romances, or powerful storytelling. And if your heart is still open for more, I'm leaving you some unforgettable love stories in the cards above, because sometimes all it takes is one story to remind us that love, real love, is not found, it is chosen. Thank you for being here.